I'm Ashley Ripke, and
I'm Nate.
we met in 2004 and got married in 2006, and adopted Elsa in 2012, and Nase in 2014.
I don't know if we've ever had the discussion, but we both kind of individually came to the conclusion that we didn't really have a desire to have biological kids. And then I think just we started talking about adoption through church that we were going to at the time, and they had a whole adoption ministry, and they had all sorts of people that have adopted, so then it sort of just sparked a lot of conversation. Yeah, so we had a lot of support because it's a confusing thing to start, and so we just kind of felt like we wanted to do that, and we just felt like we should do that, and so we had a lot of people to lean on to kind of get going.
But our dream was pretty vague. It was just the questions, okay, well, where do you want to adopt from, what age, what gender, all that. We just were like, we don't really care. But you have to decide that stuff because it has to be written down in the papers. We just had a vision of growing our family, and we always had the mindset of there are kids and we want to be parents, and so the math seems pretty easy there to just try to make that happen. It's not quite as easy as that, it turns out, but that was our big dream anyways. The big obstacles really didn't come in until we were about a year into the process and really felt like we knew that we weren't on the right path. Like what we were doing and what we had said we wanted to do wasn't what God was actually calling us to do. We started in Ethiopia, which is where our kids are from, but that was mostly because I was only 26 at the time, and so every country has their rules, and they were one of the only countries that would even take us as parents. But we thought because we were so young and we were inexperienced parents and all that an infant would be the best fit for us. And we also didn't realize that there are waiting kids. Because again, the math just makes sense that if there are waiting parents, there shouldn't be any waiting kids, and that's not how that works out either. And so we eventually at that point decided we're probably wrong with our parameters, and we're probably wrong with our age, and we feel like we're not where we're supposed to be. And so we started looking at waiting children lists, and saw Elsa's little picture, and she was 2.5 at the time. And so I saw her, and I thought, this isn't what we're, this isn't what we've been doing. I don't know, and it was scary. But it was just I couldn't get her out of my head. And I looked at hundreds of kids, but couldn't get her out of my head. And it was just if we don't go for her, what if no one goes for her? And we decided to completely scrap the adoption process that we were on. So at that point, we lost everything that we had done, all the paperwork and the finances and all of that. It was just a wash to start over. We called the agency and said we want to move ahead with her if you'll take us. They got to approve us too, So they did, and at that point it was just it was really, really weird. Obviously I've never been pregnant, so but I guess it's probably sort of like finding out you're pregnant, but then also immediately knowing it's a girl or a boy and what they look like, and all we went from not parents to parents in the course of one phone call. But that was fine because our dream had now shifted into an actual person, this little girl. And so then at that point, the goal really just became, how do we get her home as quickly as possible? And of course, we hit road bumps, like almost every adoption process does. But like we went and met her in August of that year, and that was awesome. And then they make you go home and leave them there. And I think in those 7 months, that was probably the biggest obstacle. Just like having to leave her there and then having to wait 4 months. I mean, I guess we sort of did at the end, like to make it. Nate just hopped on a plane and went over, and I basically emailed the embassy and said he's coming over and he's not leaving until you clear her to come home. Because that second adoption process, Dream started out differently than where it ended too, because we thought, well, maybe we'll go to China this time, or maybe, you know, like we were being pulled in a few different directions, and then you were the one that actually said, because we had kind of started the paperwork for like China, and then Nate came to me and said, we need to stop that, we need to go back to Ethiopia, which was super weird, because you had kind of said, you kind of scope everything out and then I'll help make it happen. And so when he said that, I was like, okay, I'm gonna listen to that because he's pretty sure. And then what was actually really weird is the day that he said that was the day that Nase's paperwork was done. But then about 2 weeks after we started that process, Nase's little face came up on the and Elsa actually is, we were looking at him and she was kind of bouncing around and she saw him. They love this story. She saw him and she said, "Who's that?" And we said, "It's a little boy in Ethiopia and he doesn't have a mommy and a papa right now." And she just said, like duh. She was like, "Well, you be his mommy and papa." And I was like, okay, yeah, that's pretty easy. And his process started out quite smoothly, and Ethiopia had changed some things to make it that way, and we thought this will be much easier, all that. And then, you know, we're getting ready to bring him home, and we're just waiting for those dates, and we instead get an email saying that the agency is going bankrupt. That, I think out of both adoptions, that was the biggest obstacle, because it was just like, there wasn't necessarily an answer, and we didn't know who to call or who could fight for Nase, or there just wasn't an answer. What to do, just knowing I'm gonna do whatever I have to do. I'm gonna call whoever I have to call. I'm gonna go wherever I have to go.
Right.
You know.
But then it just made it, I think, easier to deal with some of those roadblocks, knowing that there were people that have been through similar things that could kind of help you think about it and work through it.
I think we're at a point in the story right now where, let's see, Elsa, November will be 6 years? 6 years. And Nase has been like 4.5, and we're at a point now where there's, I don't know, there's less daily obstacles.
They've both been with us now longer than they would have been anywhere else.
Yeah, right. That's
which I think is a big turning point in the way that like things are. So I think we were always kind of not, I don't know how to say this the best way, but I mean it's always difficult. You know, parenting is difficult, adoption is difficult, but it gets to a point where you start to feel normal, like it's normal life, and I think we've reached that point now.
Yeah.
And that's not to say things are easy, but like it feels like this is how it was always supposed to be.